Looks like we got some interesting news coming out of Brazil here regarding Nintendo and their MIG cartridge ban. If you don't know what that is, we're going to cover that here in a second, but it looks like Brazil's trying to fight against Nintendo for what they're calling consumer rights. Let's take a look. Let me bring you on over. So basically what's going on, if you don't know what a MIG cartridge is, let me explain real quick. That's MIG. It's basically an empty Switch cartridge, and you can go online, you can use some software and put the actual file data of a game that you want to play onto this MIG cartridge and then pop it in your Switch and play. So think like, let's say you want to play Mario Odyssey, you could get the files and data from Mario Odyssey, put it on this cartridge and put it in your Switch, and now you have access to that game as if you had bought it from the store. So recently what happened though, excuse me, is Nintendo updated their user policy to say that if you are caught using one of these, you will basically get your console bricked. And it would display an error. And this is an article from Nintendo Life. If you guys have never followed Nintendo Life, they are a fantastic channel. But I saw this article on their page and I wanted to bring it to your attention. But yeah, it would display this error that you see here, error 21244508, and it basically just says that you have violated the use of that policy that you signed and agreed to, and therefore this console is no longer going to be used. What's been happening, the reason why this made such a splash is because third-party vendors are basically taking these consoles which are bricked and reselling it to the market as if it's a brand new console. So when the user opens this console and goes to use it, guess what? It's already pre-bricked. You can't do anything about it. You can reach out to Nintendo. Nintendo's just going to be like, hey man, that Switch violated our terms. Sorry, nothing we can do. And the user's kind of just left in the dust. There's nothing they can do. But it looks like Nintendo is going to have a little bit of a legal battle on their hands with Brazil. So Brazil is basically coming out and saying that, hey, you're basically not allowing someone to use the console for the intended purpose and use of what they paid for. They paid for the console to be able to use it for playing their own games, for accessing the eShop and doing stuff like that. By taking it away and bricking the console because you believe that it is a violation of your use policy, that's not okay. And I find that interesting because, you know, we kind of run into that whole game key situation, right? Where it's like, well, I didn't really buy it. You bought the license to use it. Well, are you buying the Switch and the software on the Switch, or are you just buying a license to use the software that comes preloaded on a Switch? And I think that's a very, very muddy situation because when I, pick up my Switch, I assume I own the Switch. The Switch is mine. I can use it in any way I want. And if Nintendo doesn't like it, yeah, they should be able to restrict maybe my access to the eShop if they catch me, illegally downloading things and stuff like that. I totally understand that part. But for example, with a MIG card, that is a physical item that I have that I'm putting in my Switch to use, and I'm just using the hardware of the Switch to access that, right? I'm not using the software of the eShop or anything like that. I'm not accessing the eShop to play this cartridge. It's the hardware that I paid for, right? I paid, in this case, $450 at a minimum to be able to play these games. So if I paid for the hardware, basically, why can't I just do whatever the heck I want with it? And of course, you have the other side of the aisle, which is like, yeah, but this is a clear, blatant misuse of the product. You are illegally downloading and installing games onto these MIG cartridges in order to bypass the actual cost of these products, which is harming the developers, harming the producers. It's harming the industry as a whole. And then of course you have the white knights who are like, yeah, but the games are so expensive. If they didn't have the games be so expensive, I wouldn't feel the need to do this. We're fighting back against Nintendo and their ridiculous prices and their ridiculous consumer practices. So you have multiple parties here who are all saying different things about what are we going to do to look at this in a sort of holistic way to understand, is this or is this not okay? Well, if you want my opinion, I don't necessarily think they should be able to brick your console. I think that is pretty messed up. I do maybe think they could do something in terms of like limiting eShop access, or what they really should do is they should just crack down on the ability to detect a MIG cartridge, right? Maybe they just have it coded in the cartridges, a certain line that says this is a legit code for a cartridge. Now, of course, over time, hackers are going to pull that code out of a cartridge. They're then going to have that uploaded into these MIG files, so that way the consumer who's doing this can just bypass it again. That's the ebb and flow of hacking versus the resolution. That has always been the case, right? I've been gaming on PC for years and years and years, and it's always a battle between the hacker software and the anti-cheat software. You never can stay on top. You can limit it as much as you can, but they will always find a way to bypass the files and bypass the system. That's just the nature of the beast. And I have a feeling that's going to be the same thing here, right? You're going to have these MIG carts are going to exist for who knows eternity, basically, because it's allowing these users to utilize the hardware that was given to them and the method of playing these games, right, these cartridges, to make the switch to do this. Now, could they necessarily get around this by requiring online checks every time you put a game in? Sure, but now we're running into issues with not being DRM free whenever you want to play games on your Switch, and that would absolutely suck, and nobody's going to want that. Imagine what happened when Xbox tried to have their system be DRM, and every time you wanted to play a game, it had to do an online check. They're going to ruin the Switch if they do something like that, so that's not the answer. So what is the answer? That's something Nintendo's going to have to find out, because in reality, we as the consumers are the ones that are suffering. I went out and I bought a Switch. I bought Mario Kart World, Yakuza, right? I bought all these games at these stupid prices that they now want them to be at, and you know, you call me a Nintendo shill, but I did it because I wanted to do stuff for the channel. I wanted to have fun with the Switch, and I do like the Switch as a console. But at the end of the day, I can see why someone who's basically saying, I want to play Mario Kart World, but I don't want to spend this stupid absorbent amount of money on it, might do something like this because, you know, you're either A, sticking it to the man, or B, you just don't have the funds for it. Now, one could argue if you don't have the funds for Mario Kart, why did you buy a Switch 2? Fair. But look at what's happening here, right? You have one user, and they do mention it here, which I thought was kind of nice, one user who did buy a third-party console that was resold on the Walmart page, and they were able to return it to Walmart, get their money back, and get the situation resolved. But that's such a few and far in between situation, because most often these users are probably buying them on eBay, they're probably buying them on other marketplaces which necessarily don't have a lenient return policy or refund policy or protections against you know, situations like this for their users. And when that happens, you basically just blew $450, and now you're up to the mercy of Nintendo, seeing if Nintendo is going to do anything to kind of help you with that and offset what just basically was a scam. And I don't know, they don't say here, again, Nintendo Life, great publisher, great editors, they do a fantastic job bringing us news, but they also don't mention anything in here if Nintendo at any point has fixed the situation for anybody who's bought it third hand. They may not know. Nobody may know, honestly, at this point. But the fact is, the consumer rights watchdog is arguing that this policy violates user rights to access services that they paid for. So they're basically giving Nintendo a chance to say, hey, you're limiting people who bought a Switch 2's ability to go on the eShop, to utilize the hardware, to play the games that they are buying. And because of that, you're violating that agreement when the consumer buys a product, right? I spent $450 on a Switch. I expect to receive a Switch and play a Switch. How I play that Switch is my business, as long as it doesn't affect you and your company, which is what these MIG cartridges are doing, right? They're denying funds and income to the company, which is fair. Nintendo basically said that they have replied to this report, to this legal challenge, and they will reply within 20 days. So this was updated today at 6 a.m. by Ollie Reynolds. Great article, Ollie. And it looks like we'll have 20 days to kind of figure out what's going on. Again, personally, I think that if I have a Switch 2 and I have a MIG cart, that's my business. I don't think Nintendo should be getting involved in how I utilize my Switch. But on the other hand, I can see the issues with that because, right, emulation of games and ROMs of games is a sticky situation, because we as gamers want to play these old games that we absolutely love from our childhood, that Nintendo and really all these companies refuse to give us access to because of whatever reason. They just don't want to give it. Like, how many of us, and we'll get away from Nintendo, how many of you guys played Legend of Dragoon on the PlayStation and we're begging for a re-release or begging for a way to play it? Now it is out on the PlayStation Network the classics package, which is great. But what if you don't have that? What if you don't have a PlayStation anymore? What if what if your situation is you can only get an Xbox, or you only have a Switch 2, and you're looking for another way to play Legend of Dragoon? There is no other way. And yes, it could be argued, well, that's a PlayStation exclusive, that's why, and you're right. But what happens before that situation where it was re-released on that PlayStation Classics library? You never could play it. Other games like from my childhood that I would love to play again, what was that? There's one called Urban Assault. It's a PC game. Maybe I'll flash a little bit of gameplay here. It was an RTS where you got to play, basically a commander, and you would send out tanks and helicopters, and it was really, really rugged, right? We're talking 98, 99, old game, but it was a phenomenal experience for me as a kid because I played it with my grandfather, and that's something that I will never forget. Well, I can't play that game anymore because it's not accessible anywhere. And so the only way I can play it is through finding it in other means. Same thing with one of those popular games that's not available really to anybody, the Lord of the Rings RTS, right? Battle for Middle-earth. Everybody loved that game. That game had phenomenal reviews. That game did phenomenally well. You had the expansion for the second game that kind of pushed more on, the Witch King and all that. And it was a phenomenal game. But again, we don't have access to it anymore because of the licensing situation between the Lord of the Rings family at EA and all that stuff. So all of these old games that we used to love and play just aren't accessible to us, so we want to find other ways to play them. And in some cases, people are using MIG carts for the Switch 2. People emulate them, right? Like I have Golden Sun and the original two games, right, Golden Sun and The Lost Age, on cartridges in my room. So whenever I want to play them, I don't have a Game Boy anymore, but thankfully because I own the physical copy, I can emulate them. I actually have an emulator on my phone, so when I get that urge to play them, I can play it there. Yes, I know it's on the Switch Game Boy Advance library, but when I play a Game Boy game, what is the one thing we liked about the Game Boy was the portability and ease, so I play it on my phone, right? I have an emulator on here. So for me, I like emulation, so I'm not necessarily mad about MIG carts, but my issue with MIG carts is, especially if you're downloading Switch titles that you don't own, that is illegal. That is something you're not allowed to do. But to what extent can Nintendo fight us on that? To what extent can Nintendo stop you from doing that? And that's kind of the limitation that Brazil is fighting for us. So like, hey, you may not like that they're using the MIG cart, I'm sorry, but you can't stop them from using the entire console because in one way they're using it is against what you believe to be correct or a legal challenge. So should you just go after the people using MIG carts? So if you detect a MIG cart, can you just go after them and say, hey, legally I'm gonna come after you, which Nintendo loves to do? Or is there a way you can shut down the use of that MIG cart? Because here's my thing, right? If you can detect that we used a MIG cart, or someone has, not me, I've actually never used one, I don't even know how to make them. But if you can detect that someone's using them to the point to where you can brick the system, why not just block the use of that game, right? Block the use of that software, block the use of that, that franchise, whatever you have to do. There has to be some way for you to do that because you can obviously tell that that MIG cart was in use, right? When the MIG cart gets entered, put in, as soon as you detect it's a MIG cart, why not have the Switch download a code onto that MIG cart to block it from being read, right? The user is going to sit there and go, what the heck is happening? How come my cart's not working? But the Switch itself is still fine. Now, I don't know. I'm not a developer. I'm not an engineer. I don't know the ease of that. But there's obviously a way for them to detect it, so there obviously should be a way for them to push back against it that doesn't require bricking a whole system. At least that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Are you guys happy that Brazil is going to be fighting for us? Do you think these MIG carts do violate these user rights? Do you think that maybe a MIG cart is something that users should be allowed to use? Maybe legally, so long as they have maybe the software. Because for me, example, I own a few games digitally that I would love to have a physical copy of. So I actually wouldn't mind having a MIG cart of something like Chained Echoes, or I own Mario Odyssey digitally. I'd never bought it physically. Maybe I want a physical copy of that so I can put it on my shelf, right? I can go on eBay or Etsy and get a replacement box and artwork for it and put it on my shelf so I can feel like I have a physical. I actually would really like that. But does that really violate their use? Or would that be a situation where, no, I own it, I just wanted a physical so I can play it physically as well? I don't know. What do you guys think? What is your guys' thoughts on all this? I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen, because I don't think it's fair to brick a whole system over something like this. But again, I'm not a legal eagle, right? So I don't know everything when it comes to what they are and are not allowed to do. So we'll keep you guys in touch. I guess in 20 days, hopefully we'll find out an answer of what Nintendo's going to do, whether they're going to remove this entirely from the user policy, or maybe they'll legally challenge this and they'll go at them back and say, hey, let's talk this out. Let's see why you feel this way. Let's present our arguments and see what the courts say. At the end of the day, it's going to be an interesting ride. Has this happened to any of you? Have any of you guys bought a third-party Switch or tried using a MIG cartridge and there goes everything? I would love to know. If you have to post anonymously, I totally understand. But either way, what do you guys think about this? Thank you for joining me on today's news update. As always, have a great day.